I've said this before in previous videos about sales volume and market value, but it's worthwhile diving specifically into this, the amount of active listings in the GTA. From my analysis and constant watch of the Greater Toronto Area's real estate market, the primary reason for the current market value is volume of listings. Yes, of course, there are other factors that affect market value or price, but given the extremely high number of active listings in the GTA over the last couple of years, volume of listings is by far the biggest factor in keeping real estate prices relatively low. The other factor, buyer motivation, which is driven primarily by consumer confidence, would be a close second. Let's look at the evidence. We're looking at the GTA, or Greater Toronto Area. That's the regions of Halton, Peel, York, Durham, and City of Toronto, as you can see in the map. We're looking at all residential real estate, both freehold and condo, everything combined. Let's go back 5 years to 2020. The interest rate is at a historic low, and the pandemic lockdown is going to start that spring. You can see in the chart the number of active listings during the winter of 2020, from 7,300 to over 10,000 active listings each winter month. As you can see, the amount of active listings in winter 2020 is only roughly 1/3 compared to what it is today. Here's the transaction volume, or number of sold listings for each of those months, from 4,700 to 7,700 sold properties. Interestingly, October 2025, the number of sold listings is right under 6,000. So we're currently within the range 5 years ago. But of course, the number of active listings is triple. So there's a difference. And here's the average for those same months, average price that is. We're ranging between 850,000 to 920,000 average sold price back in 2020 winter. October 2025, the average sold price is $1,061,874. If you had bought 5 years ago in January 2020, your property today would be worth about 25% more. Skipping 2 years forward to the winter of 2022, just before spring, when the interest rate started rising for the first time in years. Active listings are way down in December and January. They are 3,123 and 3,905 properties for sale, respectively. That's almost 1/10 of today's listings. We're nearly 28,000 listings in October 2025. In winter 2022, buyer motivation was up, way up. Buyers were out in droves trying to lock down a deal before the first interest rate announcement that was anticipated that spring. We peaked at 10,611 sales in March 2022. Today, we're only at 60% of that figure, and just over 1/3 from the crazy peak way back in spring 2021 of sales volume. The result of the tiny amount of listings compared to the highly motivated and numerous buyers in winter into spring 2022, all-time high average price in the GTA at $1,349,033. It's simple to see. Very low supply, very high demand results in high prices. From the winter of 2022 until today, let's look at those same three factors. Active listings now start rising overall, you can see, with the usual peaks and valleys during spring and autumn, dropping a bit during winter and late summer. Buyer motivation is down due to the rising interest rate and skyrocketing inflation. That much is obvious in this chart for transactions or sold listings. And prices from a bird's eye view fall from the winter 2022 peak. Yes, there are peaks during the spring and autumn seasons, but overall the market value has dropped by 21% from the peak till today, not taking into account inflation. A lot of mainstream media has been touting the falling interest rate will usher in a dramatic increase in buyers, and along with that, increased buyer volume and increased market value. That's not been happening at all. Since June 2024, when the interest rates started dropping again, there have been the usual spikes in spring and autumn, but not at the volume to match pre-spring 2022 numbers. And while prices aren't at their lowest since the interest rate hike, that was back in January 2024, prices haven't been rising dramatically either. Where are we now? Bank of Canada dropped its rate a few weeks ago. We're now down to 2.25%. In GTA real estate, the number of active listings are still incredibly high at 27,764 active listings. Although thankfully that number has fallen from June 2025 peak of 31,595 active listings by 12%. Transactions were at nearly 6,000 sales during the month of October 2025. If active listings weren't so incredibly high, that figure would actually be an okay volume of sales. We did have a good run from mid-June to beginning of October, where transactions or number of sales were actually higher year over year, peaking in July at 11.3% year over year. October slowed down though, and we're negative 8.6% below last year's sales figures. Market value or price. While we're above our all-time low since the 2022 peak, which was January 2024, when average prices were only $1,028,815, we're now at $1,061,874, which is obviously better than the all-time low since 2022 peak, but it's only 3% above that all-time low. As I continually say, it comes down to this: supply and demand. Economics 101. Nothing more complicated than that. For prices or market value to go up, the supply or amount of active listings needs to come down, and the motivation and number of buyers, demand, needs to rise. Sellers, if you bought after 2022, unless you absolutely have to sell, I would advise not selling for now. If you bought 2020 or before, your market value is up and it could be worthwhile selling. If you bought 10 years ago or 15 years ago, you've made a lot of equity, no doubt. Buyers, we're past the all-time low of the market almost 2 years ago, but prices are still very close to that low, and active listings are way up and buyers are down. So the market is favoring you as a buyer right now. That's my summary for this week, and I'll see you next week.